First of all, I just want to welcome this bill from Deputy O'Riordan and thank the Labour Party for using their limited private members' time to advance this legislation, and the Social Democrats are strongly in favour of it and its intended outcomes. Awareness of autism and neurodiversity more broadly has increased in recent years. The developmental needs of children are finally being recognised, and diagnosis of adults illustrates how the condition has been so misunderstood for decades. Disgracefully, this wider awareness has not been matched by the provision of state services. Every single week, I'm contacted by families deeply concerned about their child or family member with autism who cannot access the therapeutic interventions and educational supports that they are entitled to. The situation is equally challenging for adults who do not receive support to gain employment or to live independent lives, or those having to navigate complex systems after a recent diagnosis. This bill provides for the creation of a cross-departmental autism strategy and requires all relevant ministers and public bodies to cooperate with its implementation. It also outlines the need for strong leadership, an awareness campaign and the training of state officials. This bill is exactly the actions the government should take. And that it has to be put forward by an opposition party taken within private members' time speaks volumes. The Department of Health document estimating prevalence of autism spectrum disorders in the Irish population demonstrates that the actual number of people with autism in Ireland is unclear. Operational estimates put it at 1.5% of the population, which according to the latest census data is over 76,000 people. That is close to the entire population of Galway City. The sheer scale of individuals and families affected demands a coherent and properly resourced state response. It is shocking that there is not a strategy for autism already in place. Unfortunately, we know that even within departments, policy is disparate and inconsistent. The shameful lack of adequate school places for children and young people with autism is a result of poor planning. Since last September, I've been working with deeply upset and distressed parents seeking school places for this September. A few have now secured them. In other cases, children are being forced to travel hours every day from West Cork to the city to access education. And in some situations, children are repeating a year in primary school, not because of their individual needs, but because the Department of Education is giving them no other alternative. Minister, I think you know the size of Cork South West, and in that entire constituency, there is not one special school, and parents have had to form a formal campaign group to try and get one. If possible, the situation is even worse in terms of healthcare. As IAM's report into autistic children's access to healthcare from last year reveals that 2/3 of parents and guardians surveyed have had to wait 2 years or more to receive an autism diagnosis for their child. Over half, unsurprisingly, felt very dissatisfied with the HSE support services for their autistic children, and almost 4 in 5 said that they were not in receipt of any support from either early intervention or school-age going teams. Regrettably, this will come as no surprise. Children's Disability Network teams continue to be disgracefully understaffed. For example, the West Central Cork team is currently missing a speech and language therapist, 1.4 occupational therapists and a half-time physiotherapist, while the Carrigaline Kinsale Bandon team is short 3.62 occupational therapists, 2 psychologists, 1 physiotherapist and 0.5 of a speech and language therapist. The HSE continuously commits to recruiting and retaining staff, but there is very little evidence of this. Clinicians and therapists are equally deeply frustrated at not being able to provide the care they want as professionals. Moreover, the poor treatment of students and graduates are disincentives for therapists to work here. Ultimately, it is children who are impacted, with their capacity to live full, independent lives being eroded due to the absence of supports. All of these examples and figures are indicative of the reality faced by autistic children and their families. it is clear that their rights are being breached daily. A failure by the state to provide basic services forces all responsibilities and obligations onto already overstretched families. Families work and sacrifice to get private diagnosis, therapies and support, and many others do not have the option and have to watch their child suffer and even deteriorate on public waiting lists. Too often, autism is surrounded by stereotypes and misunderstandings. A strategy designed with representative groups and advocates is necessary to appreciate their needs. Figures from the National Disability Authority note that approximately 50% of adults with ASD or autistic adults have a concurrent intellectual disability, many of whom require lifelong services. Of the other 50%, some have very little need for supports, but there's a significant cohort that are disabled by our education, employment and state systems. Unfortunately, the needs of this group are often not met. This situation, combined with the lack of data on autism in Ireland, underlines the need for a strategy. Here, the bill also responds to current government deficits by requiring public bodies to maintain data collection systems to identify and record the number of people within their client bases who have autism and to calculate current and future needs for services. I also want to highlight the necessary improvements which could be addressed at later stages. Crucially, the bill must have an implicit and binding obligation on the Minister to engage with people with autism, advocates and disabled persons organisations, DPOs. Paternalistic and ableist cultures are hardwired into government departments and state bodies. It is very, very probable that without such a clause, the strategy, awareness campaign and associated measures could be developed without any input from people with autism. The exclusionary process surrounding the rushed assisted decision-making capacity amendment bill is the latest example of this type of approach. I have no doubt that Deputy Reardon is open to that inclusion. The government likes to talk about a rights-based approach to autism, but we actually have a budget-based approach. Services, therapies, classes are provided according to budgets, not needs. This is the most sickening part. We actually know the need, we understand the need. The Government, Department of Health and Education, the HSE, they are all aware. There is an abundant and pressing need for an autism strategy that adequately and respectfully provides the full range of integrated services needed by both children and adults. Children with autism and their families are being failed every day. They've been denied proper educational opportunities in their localities. Assessments take years and therapeutic interventions are practically non-existent for many families. Adults with autism face particular challenges and barriers that are only beginning to be fully understood, not to mind resolved.
Thank you, Deputy.
We need a fully resourced strategy that recognises the complexities and diversities of issues and experience involved. Any delays or deferrals intentionally makes the situation worse for individuals and families struggling. Children, families, adults and whole communities need this strategy as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Deputy.